The stars bled into silence, their light dimming as though the galaxy itself were mourning something long forgotten. Kaldrith Reach shimmered faintly at the edge of that fading canvas, its crystalline spires catching the waning glow of suns already dying. Once it had been a bastion, a place of song and triumph, where the Aeldari had believed themselves eternal. Now it was a husk of glass and memory, its corridors filled with echoes of laughter that had long since turned to dust. The wind that wound through its ruins carried the scent of ash, though no fire yet touched it. It was as though the cosmos had already decided its fate, and all that remained was to wait for the flames to make truth of what was already carved in destiny. And you, listener, who walk with us through this sorrowed night, we truly love you, and it is because of that love that we tell this story. Before we begin the descent into ruin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it there? Now let us begin. High Seer Lirin stood upon the high balcony of the Seer's Tower, her eyes drawn not to the starlight but to the shadows between them. Her hair, silver like woven moonlight, caught the dim glow as the crystals beneath her feet hummed softly, as though aware of her restless spirit. She was older than her reflection suggested, her beauty a curse of centuries rather than a blessing. She had seen empires rise and fall, had walked among heroes and traitors, and had whispered prophecies into the ears of lovers who had long since returned to the dust. The burden of foresight weighed heavy, and tonight it was heavier still. The Reach was not merely a fortress, but a prayer made stone, a desperate promise to preserve what fragments of the Eldari remained after the birth of She Who Thirsts. But prayers were fragile things. Liren felt it in the tremor of the spires, in the silence of the shrines. Their infinity circuit, once a harmonious river of soul song, now pulsed unevenly, as though it too doubted survival. She pressed her hand to the crystal rail, her mind whispering into the stone, seeking the voices of the dead for comfort. But what came back was silence. Silence and a gnawing hunger that was not entirely foreign. She closed her eyes, and in that silence she saw the vision again. The Reach engulfed in fire, the sky torn open with screaming light. She saw the bodies of her people scattered, their spirits dragged into the abyss by hooks of shadow. And always, in the center of the vision, she saw herself, crowned in light not her own, her eyes hollow, her mouth twisted into something that might have been triumph or despair. She was immortal in that vision, eternal yet utterly alone. When she opened her eyes, the crystal beneath her glowed faintly, as though ashamed of her doubt. Liren whispered into the night, her voice low, cracked by centuries of restraint. Is it betrayal to seek survival, or betrayal to let them die with me? The night gave no answer, only the distant rumble of fleet engines far beyond the veil. Behind her, the door of the balcony opened, and Kael'thar entered. His steps were measured, his armor worn but proud, etched with runes of protection that no longer gleamed as brightly as they once had. His presence filled the space like the steady thrum of a heartbeat. He was younger than her by centuries, yet his eyes carried the same weight of sorrow, as though their bond had allowed him to see through her visions. You saw it again, he said, his voice calm, though not without tenderness. She nodded, unable to look at him. The Reach burns. It has burned 1,000 times in my dreams. It burns still. Kael'thar stepped closer, resting his gauntleted hand upon hers. The gesture was small, yet it bound them more tightly than all the oaths she had sworn in council chambers. Dreams are warnings, not sentences. We are not yet ash. But the ash comes, she replied, finally turning to meet his gaze. His face was carved in lines of discipline, yet his eyes betrayed a warmth she could not bear. In his presence, the weight of centuries felt both heavier and lighter, as though his mortality reminded her of what she had already lost. "They look to you," he said. "They believe in you, even if you no longer believe in yourself." She wanted to argue, to remind him that faith was brittle, and love more brittle still, but the words died upon her tongue. Instead, she withdrew her hand and looked back to the horizon, where the stars bled faintly, each one a reminder of another world fallen. Belief is a knife, Aeldar. It cuts deepest when it is betrayed. He did not flinch at the word. "Then we will not betray them." But she said nothing, for she knew the truth. Betrayal was already walking among them, cloaked in smiles and honeyed words. She had seen its shadow in her visions, though the face remained obscured. Perhaps it was Merath, with his restless ambition. Perhaps it was another, waiting silently. Or perhaps the darkest thought whispered, it was herself. The silence stretched until the night itself seemed to listen. Far below, the halls of the Reach stirred faintly with the movements of guards and servants, their lives small sparks clinging to hope they could not name. The air was sharp, cold, carrying the scent of storms from the nebulae beyond. Somewhere deep within, the infinity circuit pulsed again, louder this time, like a heartbeat too fast, too desperate. Liren turned from the balcony and walked past Aeldar, her robes whispering across the crystal floor. She could feel his gaze follow her, heavy with things unsaid. She did not tell him that in her vision, his body lay among the ashes, his spirit unmoored, reaching for her, even as she turned away. She did not tell him, because to speak it would be to make it true, and some truths were better left in silence. She descended the spiraling staircase into the Hall of Shards, where broken relics of the old empire lay encased in crystal. There, she paused before a mirror of obsidian, its surface rippling faintly as though it too remembered. In its dark depths, she saw not her own reflection, but the vision again, her crowned in light, alone upon a throne of bones. She lifted her hand, almost in supplication, and the mirror trembled as though eager to answer. "Immortality," she whispered, the word a sin and a prayer, both. Would it save them, or would it only damn me? The mirror rippled once more, and then stilled, leaving only her own reflection, weary and hollow. She turned away, but the question followed her like a shadow, pressing close, whispering that the line between salvation and betrayal was thinner than she wished to believe. Above, thunder rolled across the heavens, though no storm was yet near. Kaldrith Reach shuddered faintly, as though the stones themselves foresaw the fire to come. Liren closed her eyes, and in the darkness, she could almost hear the galaxy laugh. The morning of Kaldrith Reach did not begin with light, for the sun that once bathed its spires had long since dimmed into a sullen ember. Instead, the day began with the low hum of crystal conduits and the quiet shuffle of lives burdened by the knowledge that their time was waning. The streets below the Seer's Tower were lined with fragments of memory, statues of warriors who had died in brighter ages, their eyes turned towards stars that no longer sang. Children moved quietly among the ruins, their laughter hushed by the weight of their parents' sorrow, while artisans carved delicate runes into fragments of glass, desperate to preserve beauty against the tide of despair. In the temple squares, priests knelt before empty shrines, their voices no longer sure if the gods could hear. The Reach was alive, but its pulse was slow, fragile, as though the world itself feared the silence that awaited it. High Seer Liren moved through those streets like a figure half apart from them, her presence reverent yet distant, Her robes brushed against the stone as though she were a spirit already fading. Those who saw her bowed their heads, but there was no joy in their gestures, only a kind of pleading. Each gaze upon her asked the same question. Would she save them, or would she let them drift into extinction? Their faith was both gift and burden, and she felt its edge keenly. Every word she spoke became prophecy, every silence a sentence. She paused at the edge of the infinity chamber, where the circuit's glow pulsed faintly, its rhythm faltering like the heartbeat of a dying creature. The souls within whispered restlessly, their voices once a choir but now a dissonant murmur. She pressed her palm against the surface, her thoughts reaching inward. For a fleeting moment, she felt the touch of those who had gone before, lovers, friends, warriors lost to battle, all crying for remembrance. Yet beneath their voices was a darker undertone, a hunger she could not name, as though something within the circuit had awakened and desired more than memory. She pulled her hand away, chilled, and the silence that followed seemed more damning than the whispers had been. It was Aeldar who found her there, his presence grounding her as it always had. His armor still bore the scars of the last skirmish beyond the moons, where raiders had tested the Reach's defenses. The pauldrons gleamed faintly in the dim light, his blade sheathed at his side, though the way his hand lingered near its hilt spoke of vigilance that never faded. He looked at her with the steadiness of a man who had given all he was and all he might yet be to her cause, though doubt now shadowed even his loyalty. "They sense your fear," he said softly, not accusing, but acknowledging what neither could deny. "They look to you for strength, but the Reach carries your silence like a wound." Liren did not turn to him at first. She kept her gaze upon the glowing currents, her voice low. "And if silence is all that remains, if strength has already fled?" Aeldar stepped closer, his voice firm but not unkind. "Then we speak lies if we must. Better they die believing in hope than surrender to despair before the battle is joined." She turned at last, meeting his eyes. "Would you have me deceive them? If truth is death, then yes," he said, and his answer was not hesitation, but conviction. "Hope is a weapon. Use it, even if it cuts you as you wield it." Her breath caught, not at the words, but at the weight in his gaze. For a moment she saw not her war captain, but the man who had walked beside her through centuries, whose hands had once brushed hers, not in duty, but in love unspoken. His loyalty was not merely to her station, and she knew it, though she had never dared to give name to what lay between them. To name it would have been to admit vulnerability, and she had long ago learned that love was the most dangerous of all betrayals. Their silence stretched, heavy with things unsaid, until a voice broke it. "High Seer." Merath emerged from the shadows of the chamber, his robes trailing, his face too smooth in its composure. His eyes glittered like broken glass, sharp and unreadable. He bowed with practiced grace, though the gesture carried the faintest trace of mockery. "The council awaits you. They are restless, and some whisper that you delay too long. The people demand answers." Liren studied him, the memory of her vision stirring unease. His presence was always precise, his words always measured, yet there was something in him that rang false, like a string pulled taut to breaking. She gave no voice to her suspicion, only inclined her head. "Tell them I come." Merath bowed again, his lips curving in a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Of course, my seer. May the stars yet favor us." He withdrew with the same fluid grace, his steps fading into the distant hum of the corridor. Aeldhar's gaze followed him, hard as stone. "He is a serpent," he said, one who coils close, waiting for the moment to strike. And yet even serpents have their place in prophecy, Liren murmured, her voice heavy with thought. To cut him now might be to cut away the thread we cannot yet see. Kael'thar shook his head, his jaw tightening. Threads strangle as easily as they bind. She looked once more to the circuit, to the flickering glow that pulsed like failing veins. Within it, she thought she glimpsed a shadow, a form half familiar, whispering promises she dared not repeat. The choice before her grew sharper with every passing moment. To embrace the path of forbidden immortality, or to watch her people fade as so many had before. Both roads led to sorrow, but one offered her the illusion of power, and illusions, she knew too well, could bind the hearts of mortals as tightly as truth. When she left the chamber, the halls of Kaldrith seemed quieter, as though the stones themselves listened to her steps. The artisans had ceased their carving, the priests their prayers. Everywhere eyes followed her, searching for signs, for answers, for salvation she did not yet know how to give. She raised her chin, allowing her voice to carry when she spoke, even if the words were hollow. The Reach endures. The crowd echoed her, their voices rising in fragile unity, though their eyes still carried doubt. She smiled faintly, not for herself, but for them, and in that moment she felt the knife edge of Kael'thar's words. Hope was a weapon, and she had just drawn it. Whether it would save them or cut them deeper remained unknown. That night, alone in her chambers, she stood before the obsidian mirror once more. Its surface rippled, and again she saw herself crowned in light. Her people burned away, her eyes hollow. She reached out, her fingers brushing the surface, and whispered the word she feared most. Immortality. The mirror trembled, and for an instant she thought she heard laughter. The council hall of Kaldrith Reach was a chamber of fractured grandeur, its vaulted ceiling etched with constellations that no longer existed, its walls veined with cracks where crystal once shone flawless. Torches burned within crystalline sconces, their light bending strangely, as though reluctant to reveal the faces gathered within. The air was heavy with incense and argument, whispers thick enough to be mistaken for the voices of the dead. High Seer Liren entered with Kael'thar at her side, and the murmur quieted, though not into reverence. It was the silence of a blade poised, waiting to strike. Councillors sat in a crescent of elevated seats, each draped in ceremonial robes, their features worn with fear hidden behind masks of authority. Merath stood among them, his expression carved into serenity, though his eyes gleamed like knives in half-light. When he inclined his head toward Liren, the gesture was perfectly measured, yet it carried the sting of subtle defiance. The people demand a course, said Vedra, an elder priestess whose voice quavered with the strength of age rather than weakness. Every day the Reach is beset by raiders. Every night the whispers in the shrines grow louder. Our infinity circuit wanes. We cannot remain in stillness while ruin gathers. We are not still, Liren answered, her voice carrying across the chamber like the tolling of a bell. We endure. Endurance is not idleness. Her words stirred unease, for endurance alone was a fragile shield. A murmur rose again, and Merath stepped forward, lifting his hand for silence. His tone was calm, resonant, rehearsed. High Seer, none doubt your wisdom, but the Reach is not the sanctuary it once was. Our enemies multiply, our supplies diminish. The people crave more than endurance. They crave survival. Liren fixed her gaze upon him, her eyes like shards of crystal under strain. Survival at what cost? The question lingered, and into the silence Merath placed his seed of poison. There are powers beyond these walls, allies if we choose them wisely. The Drukhari hold strength enough to shield us if we bargain. Even the soulless Necronter have bargained when pressed. We need not face the void alone. The hall rippled with unease, voices rising, some outraged, some intrigued. Kael'thar's hand tensed upon the hilt of his sword, his gaze locked on Merath as though his will alone might strike him down. Liren raised her hand, and the chamber stilled again, though the tremor of dissent remained. "To consort with those who feast upon our pain," she said coldly, "or those who would bind us in chains of metal and silence, is no survival. It is surrender of the soul. Better to burn than to crawl in such darkness." But her words, though powerful, did not bind every heart. She saw it in their eyes, the calculation, the fear, the lure of any promise, no matter how poisoned. It was not only Merath who whispered of such bargains. Doubt was spreading through the council like cracks in glass. Phaedra's voice, weary yet stern, rose again. "If not such bargains, then what, seer? Speak truth, not hope. Tell us what lies upon your path of endurance." And in that moment, Liren faltered, for she could not speak the truth that haunted her nights, that the only path she had seen clearly was the path of forbidden immortality, a path lined with fire and betrayal. She could not tell them that the hope they placed in her hands was already slipping through her fingers like ash. She stood in silence, and silence was more dangerous than any lie. It was Merath who seized upon it, his smile faint and poisonous. "Then let the council decide what she cannot. Let us debate with open hearts, not clutched fears. There are those among us willing to act, even if others would hesitate until all is lost." The words dripped like venom, subtle enough not to accuse, yet sharp enough to wound. Liren's gaze met his, and, though neither spoke it, they both knew this was war already begun, not of armies, but of wills. Kael'thar broke the silence, his voice cutting across the chamber with iron clarity. "The Reach will not kneel to carrion feeders or soulless machines. Those who suggest such treachery betray the memory of every soul who rests in the circuit." Merath inclined his head with a mockery of courtesy. "Strong words from a soldier, yet strength of arms cannot mend what is already unraveling. Perhaps the seer fears to speak the choice she has seen." The chamber tensed, the words striking too close to truth. Lorraine stepped forward then, her presence filling the hall like stormlight. Her voice carried not anger, but sorrow sharpened into steel. "Beware your tongue, Merath. The Reach may be fading, but it has not yet fallen, and I will not see its last refuge handed to predators while breath remains in me." The council stirred again, some nodding, some whispering in disquiet. The fractures were clear. Faith and doubt, loyalty and ambition, weaving themselves into a web that could only break. Liren looked upon them all, and for the first time she felt not the burden of their hope, but the cold certainty of betrayal's shadow. It was not a matter of if, but of when. The council adjourned in tension, each figure withdrawing to their chambers, voices rising in private corners like storms gathering in silence. Liren lingered only a moment, her gaze on the star-map ceiling, where constellations of broken ages gleamed faintly. She remembered the names of those stars, once sung in triumph, now spoken only in mourning. She wondered how long before her own people's name became another silent constellation, remembered only by the ruins they left behind. Kael'thar joined her as the chamber emptied, his voice low, urgent. "He pushes too far. One day soon his tongue will become a blade. Then let him strike," she said, her tone weary. "Perhaps prophecy demands it." Aeldar gripped her arm, forcing her to face him. His eyes, dark and fierce, cut through her calm facade. Do not let prophecy chain you. You are not a puppet of visions. You are flesh, blood, choice. If you give yourself to fate, you betray us more surely than Merath ever could. She drew back, his words wounding deeper than Merath's venom. For in them was truth, and truth was harder to face than lies. She turned away, her voice quiet. Perhaps I am already betrayed, Aeldar. By time, by silence, by the stars themselves. He did not answer, and their silence stretched like a wound. That night, alone in her sanctum, Liren lit no candles. She stood before the obsidian mirror again, its surface rippling faintly in the dark. This time, the reflection did not wait. It came to her unbidden. She saw herself crowned in burning light, the Reach in ashes at her feet. But in this vision, a figure lay at her side, broken and still. She reached toward the reflection, and her hand trembled. The mirror whispered back, though no lips moved. A voice like her own, twisted by eternity. Salvation demands sacrifice. To save them, you must betray them. To endure, you must forsake all you love. Her breath caught, and though she tried to pull away, her fingers brushed the glass. It was cold, colder than death. And in that moment, she knew. The path of survival and the path of damnation were the same road, only seen through different eyes. Outside, thunder rolled again, though the skies were clear. Kaldrith Reach shivered in its bones. The alarm rose, not in sudden violence, but in a low, mournful pulse that echoed through the spires of Kaldrith Reach. A sound like the heartbeat of the world, quickening in dread. The crystalline walls resonated with it, vibrating faintly as though the stones themselves were aware of what approached. From the high balcony, Liren looked to the void beyond the protective wards and saw the silhouettes of ships sliding from shadow, their hulls blackened with the scorch of countless raids. Like carrion birds circling the carcass of a dying beast, they came in silence at first, then with the flare of engines and the glitter of weapons priming for fire. The first true breach had begun. Aeldar stood at her side, his blade already unsheathed, its runes glowing faintly in the dim light. His jaw was set in grim determination, but his eyes, when they turned to her, held not fear, but that quiet plea she had seen so many times. It was the plea of a man who would fight to the last, but who wished his death to mean something more than delay. She gave him no words, only a nod, and he descended to marshal the defense. His armor clattered against the crystal stair, each step a drumbeat that resonated with the slow march of inevitability. The skies ignited as the first salvo struck. Shields flared brilliant against the darkness, throwing shadows that danced like wraiths across the towers. The ground shook with distant impacts, tremors rippling through the halls as fragments of burning stone rained down upon the outer districts. Screams rose faintly from below, carried on the wind like brittle reeds. Liren felt them in her bones, each cry a thread pulling tighter around her heart. She closed her eyes and whispered words of protection, though she knew the warp did not always listen, and when it did, it rarely answered without a price. On the western wall, Aeldar led the charge. His voice rang out, commanding warriors into formation, their weapons glowing as runes activated, their banners unfurled like defiance written in flame. Against the raiders they stood, elegant in armor that had once symbolized pride, now tarnished by centuries of retreat. The first clash was swift, brutal, steel against steel, blade against whip. The Drukhari descended like shadows given form, their laughter sharp as broken glass, their eyes gleaming with hunger, not for conquest, but for suffering. Each cut they gave was deliberate cruelty, each strike a symphony of pain. Yet Kael'thar met them without falter, his blade flashing, cutting arcs of light through the dark. From the council balconies above, the leaders watched, their voices hushed in anxious debate. Some called for retreat deeper into the spires, others for desperate counterattack. Merath stood among them, his hands folded calmly, as though this chaos had been foreseen, perhaps even invited. Lirin felt his eyes upon her as she entered, and though he spoke no words, his gaze carried its own language. See how your endurance crumbles. See how survival demands more than faith. The walls will not hold, one counselor cried, his voice breaking. We must conserve what remains, withdraw into the heart. And abandon those who fight for us? Another spat, but his anger was hollow, his fear too transparent. Lirin silenced them with a gesture, her voice calm, though the tremor in the walls echoed in her chest. The Reach has endured because it did not fracture. If we scatter now, we do the enemy's work for them. Her words quieted them, though not with conviction, only with the weight of her authority. Their faith was brittle, their unity already cracking. She could see it in the darting of their eyes, the half-hidden whispers. Betrayal was not only a vision of the future, it was already here, waiting for its hour. A flare lit the sky, and from the balcony she saw the western defences collapse inward. The raiders had breached, their sleek craft slicing through the air like daggers. The walls splintered, crystal shards falling like rain, and among the chaos she saw Kael'thar, his armour scorched, his blade red with blood, rallying those who still stood. His presence was a beacon, but even beacons burn out. She felt the pull of her vision then, the temptation of power whispering again in her ear. With immortality, you could save him. You could save them all. She turned away before the thought could root itself, but the mirror of her chamber seemed to shimmer even in her mind, its reflection mocking her hesitation. Salvation and damnation lay along the same path, and the more the Reach bled, the clearer that truth became. When she returned to the Hall of Shards, the infinity circuit glowed erratically, its pulse frantic. She knelt before it, her hands trembling as she pressed them to its surface. The souls within cried louder now, their voices overlapping in desperation. She felt them clawing at her mind, begging, warning, demanding. Among their chorus, one voice rose clear, a voice she knew, though the body had been dust for centuries. It was her sister, long dead, whispering through the crystal. Endure no longer. Choose, before choice is taken from you. Her breath faltered, and she pulled away, her eyes stinging with the weight of memory. She remembered her sister's face, laughing in gardens now long ash, her hand warm in Lirin's own. She remembered the day she lost her, torn apart by an enemy that had come too swiftly, while Lirin herself had hesitated, too bound by visions to act. That guilt had never left her, and now it returned, a wound reopened. The temple bells rang then, signalling another breach, the eastern wall this time. The Reach was surrounded, its enemies pressing on every side, their cruelty unrelenting. Fires rose in the lower districts, painting the sky red, their smoke seeping into the sanctums like prophecy made flesh. Lirin rose, her decision unspoken but pressing closer with each breath. She descended once more to the battle lines, her presence like a shadow among her people. Warriors fell to their knees as she passed, pleading for her blessing, her protection, her command. She gave them words, but her heart was already divided. She found Kael'thar again, his face streaked with blood, his armor cracked, his eyes burning with the flame of a man who had not yet surrendered. "Seer," he said, breathless but steady. If the Reach falls, promise me you will not walk alone. Promise me you will flee with what remains. She looked at him, and in his eyes she saw the reflection of her vision. The ashes, the crown, his body broken. She wanted to tell him he would not fall, that he was stronger than fate, but the words choked in her throat. Instead, she touched his face, briefly, a gesture of intimacy she had denied for centuries. "I promise nothing," she whispered. The sky split again with fire, and the world shook. Above them, the enemy descended in greater numbers, their laughter echoing like thunder. Aeldar raised his blade, his voice rallying the last defenders. Lirin closed her eyes, and for a moment, let herself imagine the Reach whole again, shining, eternal. Then she opened them, and the fire returned. The Reach was burning. Smoke curled through the corridors of Kaldrith Reach, weaving like a serpent through shattered glass and broken stone. The once pristine air was thick with the iron tang of blood and the sharp sting of burning crystal. The cries of the dying echoed faintly, each voice fading too quickly into silence. Lirin moved through the devastation like a spectre, her robe streaked with ash, her face pale but unbowed. She had long since silenced her own tears. Grief was a luxury she could no longer afford. Her visions had shown her ruin, but to walk among its living embers was to know the true cruelty of fate. The council had gathered again, though now their chamber bore the scars of the siege. Shards littered the floor, and fissures crawled like veins up the walls. Their voices rose in discord, accusations flung like blades. Some demanded retreat into the infinity circuit. Others whispered still of bargains with those who hungered for their souls. And at the center of the chaos, Merath stood calm, his voice measured, his eyes shining with conviction that was too polished, too deliberate. "Your faith has carried us only into ruin," he said, his tone silken yet edged. "The western walls lie. In ash, the eastern guard is shattered. We bleed, and still the High Seer offers us nothing but riddles and silence. We must act, and we must act decisively. I have already opened lines of negotiation. There are those willing to spare us, if we are willing to grant them what they desire." The words struck like a thunderclap. Several councillors leaned forward eagerly. Others recoiled in disgust. Aeldar, standing at Lirin's side, took a step toward Merath, his hand on his sword, his voice low and seething. "You would sell us to predators. You would hand our souls to tormentors in chains." Merath did not flinch, his gaze turning cold. Better chains than extinction. Better to endure in shadow than vanish in light. Lirin's voice rose then, and the chamber stilled at its weight. And what of dignity? What of the memory of those who gave their lives, so that we might remain Aeldari and not slaves? Would you strip even that from us, Merath? Survival at any price is not survival. It is desecration. For the first time, Merath allowed his mask to slip, his smile sharpening like a blade. "And yet you yourself have whispered to the stones of forbidden rites. Have you not? Do you think I do not see the shadows in your eyes? You would call me traitor, yet your hands tremble with the same temptation. Tell me, High Seer, when the moment comes, will you burn for them, or will you rise alone?" Gasps rippled through the chamber, the councillors exchanging glances heavy with suspicion. Aeldar moved swiftly, drawing steel halfway from its sheath, but Lirin raised her hand to still him. Her heart pounded, for Merath's words cut too close to truth. She saw their eyes upon her, saw their faith waver further, saw the first fracture of trust become a chasm. "You speak boldly," she said at last, her voice cold as winter. but you cloak your treachery in reason. I will not waste the little time we have answering shadows. When the Reach is safe again, your dealings will be accounted for." Merath bowed, his lips curving in mock courtesy. "If there is a Reach left to judge me." The council dissolved into murmurs, but Lirin could feel the tide turning. Seeds of doubt had been planted, watered by fear. Even those who despised Merath now looked at her with unease, as though wondering if prophecy and betrayal were one and the same. She withdrew from the chamber, with Kaldrith at her side, her steps heavy, her silence deeper than words. The streets were chaos. Fires burned unchecked, casting long shadows across the once proud avenues. Warriors limped through the ruins, some carrying the wounded, others dragging fallen comrades to the shrines for final rites. Children huddled in corners, their wide eyes reflecting the flames. Lirin walked among them, blessing where she could, offering words that rang hollow even to her own ears. They looked at her with desperate hope, and the weight of it pressed upon her like chains. She had become both their savior and their executioner, and she did not know which role her visions demanded she fulfill. In the quiet of the northern cloisters, Kaldrith found her again. His armor was cracked, his face streaked with soot and blood, but his voice held the same steady fire. "He poisons them," he said. "Every word he speaks coils deeper. If he is allowed to breathe longer, the Reach will tear itself apart from within." Lirin met his gaze, her voice weary. "If I strike him down, I confirm his whispers. They will say I silenced him to hide my own betrayals. If I let him live, he spreads his venom freely. The blade is sharp on both edges." Kaldrith stepped closer, his hand brushing hers as though to anchor her. "Then let me bear that edge. I will cut him down and carry the stain. Better my honor than your name." For a heartbeat, she wanted to let him. For a heartbeat, she wanted to place the burden in his hands and free herself of the choice. But when she looked at him, she saw again the vision, the ashes, the crown, his body broken at her feet. She could not hasten that fate, could not give it shape with her own will. She pulled her hand away, her voice breaking, though she forced it steady. "No, Kaldrith, not yet. His moment will come, as prophecy demands. Until then, we endure." The night deepened, and the Reach groaned under the weight of its wounds. Lirin returned to her chambers, drawn once more to the obsidian mirror. Its surface rippled before she even touched it, eager, hungry. She saw herself again, crowned in light, the bones of her people beneath her feet. But this time, the vision shifted. Merath stood beside her in the reflection, his smile sharp, his hands empty of chains. He bowed to her as though she were his queen, and when she looked into his eyes, she saw no fear, only acceptance. She recoiled, heart hammering, but the mirror whispered still. "Every betrayal is a choice, and every choice a betrayal. Who will you forsake, High Seer, him or them?" Her hands trembled, her breath unsteady. She pressed her forehead to the cold glass, whispering to the silence, "I do not know." And in the depths of the mirror, her reflection smiled as though it already did. The night in Kaldrith Reach was not silent, for silence had long since abandoned its spires. Instead, it was alive with the distant clash of steel, the cries of the wounded, and the low rumble of collapsing walls. Fires burned in the lower districts, their orange glow flickering against crystal towers that had once caught the light of 1,000 suns. Lirin walked among the shadows of her sanctum, her steps measured, her thoughts consumed by the mirror's whisper. Betrayal or survival, damnation or extinction. no path led to salvation without cost. The obsidian surface still trembled faintly from her last touch, as though hungering for her decision, as though mocking her hesitation. She turned away, but the mirror's reflection seemed burned into her sight, its crown of light hovering above her vision even as she closed her eyes. She pressed her palms to the stone walls, grounding herself in their solidity, though even the stones quivered beneath the weight of the siege. Beyond the chamber, the pulse of the infinity circuit beat irregularly, its glow faint and strained. It felt to her as though the very souls within had grown restless, urging her to act, to choose, to abandon restraint. When dawn came, it was not with light, but with another attack. The eastern sky was ablaze with ships, their shadowed hulls swarming toward the Reach like insects to a corpse. Alarms wailed again, the ground trembling beneath the force of orbital strikes. Liraen stood on the high terrace as the defenders scrambled below, her gaze fixed on the unfolding storm. She whispered prayers she did not believe would be heard, words of protection for those who ran to their deaths, words of remembrance for those who would not return. Kael'thar came to her side, his armor dented, his blade stained from battles unending. He carried himself with unbroken resolve, though exhaustion clung to his every movement. His eyes sought hers, searching for something she had not yet given him. "They will breach the inner gates before nightfall," he said. "We cannot hold them much longer." She looked at him, and in that moment she saw again the vision of his body broken at her feet. She swallowed against the weight of it, against the terrible inevitability. "And yet, you will fight. I was born to," he said, his voice steady, though softer when he added, "and I will fight for you, even if you do not ask it." Her breath faltered, and she turned her gaze away, back to the burning horizon. She wanted to tell him that his loyalty cut deeper than any blade, that his love, silent though it was, bound her more tightly than prophecy ever could. But the words remained trapped in her throat. To speak them was to make them real, and to make them real was to lose them. The council convened once more, though fewer seats were filled now, their numbers thinned by death or desertion. The chamber was thick with smoke, the incense replaced by the bitter scent of ash. Merath stood with renewed confidence, his robes unmarked by battle, his voice calm amid the clamour. "The walls fall faster than our words can mend them," he said. "We debate while the Reach burns. I say again, there are powers willing to shield us, if only we have the courage to reach out our hands." "You call it courage," Kael'thar growled from his place at Liran's side, "but it reeks of cowardice." Merath's smile was slight, his eyes cold. "Cowardice preserves life. Pride digs graves." The councillors wavered as their faces etched with fear, their hearts swayed by the simplicity of survival, even at the price of their souls. Liraen spoke, her voice cutting through the murmurs. "We are not yet fallen. To surrender now is to become the very shadows we fear. Hold the line, and we may yet endure." But her words no longer rang as they once had. She saw the doubt in their eyes, the flicker of betrayal already seeded. Merath had poisoned them too deeply, and when his gaze met hers across the chamber, she saw in his eyes not victory, but certainty, as though he knew the ending already, as though her every refusal only tightened the noose around them all. That night, Liraen returned to the infinity circuit. She knelt before its glowing heart, her hands trembling as she pressed them to the surface. The souls within cried louder now, their chorus a cacophony of grief and fury. Among them she thought she heard Kael'thar's voice. Though he still lived, she recoiled, her breath ragged, and yet the temptation grew stronger. If she bound their souls into herself, if she drew their strength into her own, she might stand against the storm. She might save them. But at what cost? Would she not become the very hunger she despised? As she knelt there, the chamber doors opened and Kael'thar entered, his presence steady, his expression weary. He looked at her, at the glow of the circuit, and for a moment his eyes softened with sorrow. "You're thinking of it," he said quietly. "I see it in your face. You're thinking of taking them into yourself." She closed her eyes, ashamed, but did not deny it. "If it could save them, if it could save you, should I not?" He stepped closer, his hand hovering near hers but not quite touching. "And what would remain of you if you did? Would it be you I fought for, or some echo wearing your face?" Her throat tightened, tears threatening, though she forced them back. "If I do nothing, you will die. They will all die. I have seen it." "Then let it come," he said, his voice breaking but firm. "Better to fall as we are than to live as something else." She turned to him, and for the first time her composure cracked. Her hand reached for his, fingers trembling as they touched. In his eyes she saw no judgment, only love, unspoken, fierce and unwavering. And it was that love that made the choice harder than any prophecy. The ground shuddered again, distant explosions rattling the crystal walls. Kael'thar's gaze held hers, as though this moment were all that remained. "Stay with us," he whispered. "Stay with me, even if it means falling." But she could not answer. Her silence was its own betrayal. When he left, she remained kneeling before the circuit, her hands pressed to the glowing surface. The voices within screamed louder, and she felt them clawing at her, offering their strength, offering eternity. She bowed her head, her tears falling against the crystal, her whisper lost in the roar of the souls. "Forgive me." The mirror in her chambers shimmered that night without her touch. Its reflection showed her crowned in light once more, her people ashes beneath her feet. But this time, Kael'thar was not broken at her side. He was gone entirely, erased as though he had never been. And in the silence that followed, she understood the cruelest truth of all. Some fates could not be defied, only chosen in which way they would wound. The siege deepened like a wound that refused to close. Kaldrith Reach shuddered beneath the weight of endless bombardment, its spires cracked and bleeding light from fractures in their crystalline skin. Smoke coiled through once sacred halls, staining the air with the bitterness of ruin. Outside, the skies burned with the glow of enemy ships, while within, the voices of the people grew thin and sharp, their faith unraveling thread by fragile thread. Liraean walked among them as one both revered and distrusted, her presence a mirror of their despair. They still bowed as she passed, but their eyes asked questions she could not answer, questions she feared to even name. The council chamber had become a place of accusation rather than guidance. Each meeting now was a battlefield of words, councillors shouting over one another, their composure shattered. Vaedra pleaded for faith, for the preservation of soul song, while others demanded retreat, exile, or surrender to any who would offer shelter. Merath stood ever in the centre, calm and precise, his voice an anchor to their panic. He did not raise his tone, he did not need to. His measured reason cut deeper than any shout. "Our defenses collapse faster than our prayers rise," he said, his gaze sweeping across the weary faces. "The High Seer has offered endurance, but endurance without victory is only a slower death. The Drukhari will spare those who submit. Even the soulless Necrontyr would welcome us into their order if it served their ends." What is dignity to the ashes? What is pride to the dead? Kaldrith slammed his hand against the council table, the sound ringing like a blade drawn from its sheath. His eyes burned with fury, his voice raw. What you call survival is a lie. To live as cattle for the Drukhari is not life. To stand as empty machines is not existence. You would trade our essence for breath, our souls for chains. Merath smiled faintly, his composure unshaken. And you would trade them for nothing, Captain. Your blade cuts only to delay. Delay is not salvation. The councillors murmured, torn, their fear outweighing loyalty. Lirin watched them, her silence heavier than speech. She knew her words no longer bound them as they once had. Merath's venom had worked too deeply, his shadow creeping into their doubts. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady, but cold. If you would kneel to carrion feeders and husks of metal, do so alone. The Reach will not be bartered while breath remains in me. Her defiance quieted them, but not with conviction. She saw suspicion in their eyes, and when they looked at her, they saw not only their seer, but the shadow Merath had painted. A woman tempted by forbidden rites, a leader walking the knife's edge of betrayal. They obeyed her for now, but it was obedience laced with fear, brittle as glass. That night, the eastern gates fell. The screams of the defenders echoed through the spires, carried on smoke and the clash of steel. Kaldrith fought at the forefront, his blade flashing as he cut through the tide of raiders. His voice rose above the chaos, rallying those who remained, his defiance a fire against the dark. From the terrace, Lirin watched, her heart torn between pride and dread. She had seen his death 100 times in vision, and every clash of his sword felt like the breath before its arrival. The infinity circuit pulsed erratically, its glow dim and restless. She returned to it once more, kneeling before its fractured surface. The voices within screamed louder than ever, demanding release, demanding to be used. She pressed her hands against the crystal, her tears falling unbidden. "I cannot," she whispered, though the temptation clawed at her. The souls clawed back, their whispers furious. She felt her sister's voice again, sharp and sorrowful. "You will let him die again, as you let me." Her breath hitched, and she recoiled. The prophecy pressed harder. Each choice was a blade, and whichever she grasped would cut her to the bone. Kaldrith found her there, his armor bloodied, his eyes fierce but weary. He knelt beside her, his voice hoarse from battle. "The walls are gone. We retreat into the heart of the Reach. But even there, we cannot hold for long." She turned to him, her hand trembling as it reached for his. For a moment, she allowed herself the intimacy she had long denied, her fingers brushing his gauntlet. "I saw you die tonight," she whispered, her voice breaking. He shook his head, his gaze unyielding. "Then let me defy even prophecy. If I fall, let it be as I am, not as something hollow. Do not damn yourself to keep me." She wanted to tell him she could not bear to lose him, that his death would shatter what little of her remained. But the words caught, trapped in the cage of her silence. Instead, she leaned against him, her forehead resting against his shoulder, her tears falling unseen. He held her for a moment, his arms strong, even in exhaustion, and in that embrace she felt both salvation and doom. When dawn broke, it came with the thunder of collapse. The northern spire fell, shattering into fragments that lit the horizon like meteors. The Reach trembled, its bones breaking. Panic swept through the survivors, their voices rising in a cacophony of fear. And into that chaos, Merath spoke again, his words carrying above the roar. "See how endurance fails," he cried, his arms raised as though he were already crowned by their despair. The High Seer's visions bring only death. I have secured a path, if only we take it. Follow me, and we may yet live. The crowd surged, torn between his voice and the fading presence of Lyraen. Some reached for him, desperate for promise, while others clung still to the seer, though their faith was fractured. Kaldrith stepped before Lyraen, his sword drawn, his voice thunderous. You would lead them into chains. You would betray all we are. Merath's smile widened, and for the first time his mask of courtesy fell away. And you would see them die for pride, Captain. Better a living slave than a dead fool. The tension snapped like a blade breaking. Warriors turned upon one another, shouts rising into blows, loyalty fracturing into violence. The Reach was besieged not only from without, but from within. Betrayal had taken root, and now it bloomed in blood. Lyraen stood in the center, her voice lost in the storm. She felt the weight of her visions pressing harder, the reflection in the mirror closer than ever. She saw herself crowned, the ashes at her feet, Kaldrith's body broken beside her. And as the council chamber dissolved into chaos, she knew the choice she had feared was no longer distant. It was here, and she could not turn away. The fires outside roared louder, the stones trembled, and Kaldrith Reach burned with the light of its own undoing. The night after the council broke into violence was a night without stars. Smoke blotted out the heavens, and the fires of Kaldrith Reach cast their own false constellations, a sky painted in ruin. The spires that still stood groaned beneath the pressure of bombardments, their crystalline bones trembling as though they too were weary of enduring. In the streets below, the people huddled in fractured groups, some pledging themselves to Merath's promise of survival, others clinging desperately to Lyraen's fragile defiance. Brother turned against brother, whispers became blows, and the Reach bled not only from the knives of raiders, but from the hands of its own. Lyraen moved through the chaos like a wraith, her presence still enough to command silence where she passed, but not enough to mend the fractures spreading like cracks in shattered glass. She watched mothers hush their children, while arguing whether to flee or to fight. She saw warriors sharpen blades while glancing nervously toward Merath's banners. The Reach no longer belonged to her entirely. It was a kingdom divided, and division was a wound no power could close without blood. In her sanctum, the obsidian mirror pulsed faintly, its surface rippling, though she had not touched it. She avoided its gaze, but the whispers still reached her ears. They sounded like her own voice, only colder, as though spoken through eternity. You will choose soon. You will drink, or you will die. Betrayal is not what they do to you. Betrayal is what you will do to them. She clenched her fists until her nails drew blood, her breath sharp in her throat. She could not silence the mirror, nor the visions it forced upon her. Every path led to ashes, but one path offered power, terrible, eternal, yet power still. She turned away, but the image of herself crowned in burning light lingered in her mind like a wound that would not heal. Kaldrith returned to her then, his armor more ragged than before, his face lined with exhaustion. He carried the scent of smoke and battle. His every step weighted with the knowledge that each defense was a last stand in itself. He dropped his sword upon the floor with a dull clang, his voice low, hoarse. We cannot hold them, Lyraen. Not from without, not from within. Merath grows stronger with every moment, and our enemies press harder. The Reach is dying. She looked at him, her chest tightening with sorrow she could not speak. And yet you still fight. His lips twisted into a bitter smile. I will fight until the end. But I fear the end comes faster than we dreamed. He stepped closer, his eyes searching hers, filled with a plea deeper than survival. Tell me you will not follow his path. Tell me you will not give yourself to the rites you whisper of in silence. Her breath faltered, but she forced the lie past her lips. I will not. He studied her, and she felt the weight of his doubt pressing against her. He did not speak it, but she saw it in his eyes. He knew. And though he still reached for her hand, though he still held her as though she were his anchor, that doubt was a shadow between them, one she could not banish. The next day, Merath made his move. From the balcony of the fractured council hall, he addressed those who would listen, his voice carrying above the din of battle. He spoke of survival, of promises made by powers beyond, of safety purchased with submission. He painted Liraean as a relic clinging to visions that brought only ruin, a seer who would rather see her people burn than bend. His words struck deep, and more than half the crowd cried out in answer. His banners rose higher, his factions swelling with each breath. Kaldrith answered with steel. His warriors clashed with Merath's in the shadow of the spires. Brother striking brother, friend slaying friend. The streets became rivers of blood, and above it all, the enemy ships circled like wolves, watching their prey consume itself. Liren stood apart, her hands trembling as she watched the Reach tear itself apart from within. Her voice was no longer enough to bind them, her visions no longer enough to warn them. The prophecy unfolded as it always had, and she was powerless to stop it. That night, she returned to the infinity circuit, its glow dimmer than ever, its pulse irregular. The souls within screamed louder now, their voices a storm. She pressed her hands to the crystal, her tears falling freely. What would you have me do? She whispered. Guide me or condemn me, but speak with clarity. The voices answered, but not with unity. Some cried for release, for peace in dissolution. Others demanded vengeance, demanding she take their strength into herself and rise eternal. Her sister's voice cut through them, sharp and sorrowful. Do not hesitate, Liren. Hesitation killed me. Do not let it kill him too. Her breath caught, and she knew of whom her sister spoke. Kaldrith. Always Kaldrith. She withdrew her hands, trembling, her body shaking with the weight of decision. She stumbled back, her reflection catching in the obsidian mirror that loomed in the corner of the chamber. It rippled, alive, eager. Her crowned self stared back at her, its hollow eyes filled with fire. And this time, Kaldrith's body lay clearly at her feet, broken, bloodied, his hand reaching toward her even in death. Her reflection smiled. She turned away, choking on her breath, whispering through tears, No, not yet, not yet. But when dawn broke again, the Reach screamed louder than ever. The enemy breached the inner walls, their ships disgorging shadows into the heart of the city. Fires spread uncontrollably, consuming shrines and sanctums alike. The screams of the dying filled the air, mingling with the clash of steel and the crack of crystal. Kaldrith rallied what warriors remained, his voice raw as he led them into the flames. Liren stood upon the highest balcony, her hands clenched so tightly the blood ran from her palms. She saw the prophecy unfolding, the ashes rising, the crown hovering nearer with every breath. And when Kaldrith looked up at her through the chaos, his eyes finding hers across the distance, she knew the choice could no longer be delayed. To save him, she would have to damn herself. To keep her soul, she would have to let him die. The fires reflected in her tears, and Kaldrith Reach burned ever brighter, as though the stars themselves were watching the moment of her fall. The walls of Kaldrith Reach fell like the ribs of a dying beast, one after another, collapsing into dust. The eastern gate was gone, the northern spires shattered, the western districts already nothing but embers swept away by cruel winds. The once proud bastion of the Aeldari had become a pyre, and every moment added fuel to the fire. Raiders moved through the ruins, their laughter cutting sharper than their blades, while above, the skies thundered with ships that circled like vultures awaiting the final collapse. The Reach was burning, not only from the outside, but from within. Its people divided, their voices raised against one another as much as against the enemy. Lirin walked among the carnage, her robes heavy with ash, her eyes hollow with visions that no longer felt like prophecy, but memory. She had seen all this before, every scream, every betrayal, every spark of fire blooming into ruin. The difference now was that she could no longer hide from the choice pressing against her heart. She felt it in the pulse of the infinity circuit, frantic and uneven. She felt it in the reflection that haunted her every glance at the mirror. She felt it in the weight of Kael'thar's gaze, fierce and unyielding, yet shadowed by the inevitability she had never dared speak aloud. The outer sanctum had become the last stand. Kael'thar rallied what warriors remained, their armor cracked, their banners torn, their spirits stretched to breaking. He stood tall among them, his voice carrying above the clash of steel, a fire in the darkness. Each command he gave was a spark, each strike of his blade a defiance against the void. Lirin watched him, her chest tightening with pride and sorrow in equal measure. In him, she saw what the Reach had once been, strong, noble, unwilling to bow. And in him, she saw the shape of his death, already etched in her visions, already waiting to unfold. Merath's betrayal came like a knife driven into a wound already bleeding. As Kael'thar's forces held the line, the traitor led his own followers in a feigned retreat, opening a corridor for the raiders to pour into the heart of the Reach. The screams rose higher as the enemy surged forward, cutting through civilians and warriors alike. Merath's voice carried even above the slaughter, cold and triumphant. "Follow me if you would live. Abandon her lies, abandon her visions. Salvation is mine to grant." His banners rose, and more of the desperate flocked to him, believing his poisoned promises even as the ground burned beneath their feet. Kael'thar roared in fury, cutting his way toward the breach, his warriors rallying around him. But for every enemy he felled, 2 more took their place. The tide was endless, cruel, merciless. Lirin saw him falter for the first time, saw his movements slow, saw the exhaustion and wounds of endless battle weigh upon him. Her heart clenched, the vision pressing against her eyes until it blurred with reality. She saw him fall, broken at her feet, his hand reaching for her even as she turned away. "No," she whispered, her voice raw. "Not yet. Not like this." She turned from the battlefield and ran to the infinity circuit, its glow frantic, its surface trembling. She pressed her hands against it, the voices of the dead surging into her mind. They screamed, they begged, they demanded. She felt their hunger, their fury, their longing for vengeance. She felt her sister's voice cut through the storm, sharp and sorrowful. "Take us. Become what you must, or lose him as you lost me." Her tears fell hot against the crystal, her body trembling as though the stones themselves rejected her weakness. "If I do this," she whispered, "I will betray everything we are. I will betray him. I will betray myself." And the voices answered, a chorus of inevitability. "Every choice is betrayal. Choose the one you can bear." The ground shook violently, dust raining from the shattered ceiling as another strike landed nearby. The walls groaned, the chamber trembling. She saw Kael'thar's face in her mind, bloodied, weary, still fighting. She saw him die again and again and again in every vision she had ever known. She could not bear it. Not again. Not him. With a cry that tore from the deepest part of her, she pressed herself fully against the circuit, opening her mind, opening her soul. The light surged, burning through her veins, searing her body with agony and ecstasy in equal measure. The souls poured into her, thousands upon thousands, their memories, their pain, their strength flooding her like a river breaking its banks. She screamed as their voices became her own, as their power bound itself to her flesh, as immortality carved its mark into her very being. The chamber blazed with light, brighter than any fire, brighter than any star. When it faded, Liren stood transformed. Her body trembled with the weight of eternity. Her eyes burned with light that was not her own. Her skin glowed faintly as though the souls within her bled through. She staggered, her breath heavy, her heart hollow. She had saved them, and in saving them, she had damned herself. She returned to the battlefield, her steps slow but inexorable, her presence a force that bent the air itself. Warriors and raiders alike turned to stare, their blades stilled by the sight of her. Kaldrith looked up, his eyes wide, his breath catching at what she had become. For a moment, he saw salvation in her, a goddess risen from the ashes. And then he saw the hollowness in her gaze, the hunger that lingered beneath the light, and his heart broke. She raised her hands, and power poured from her in a torrent. The raiders screamed as fire consumed them, their bodies turning to ash in an instant. The ground trembled, the walls shook, the very air burned with her fury. She cut through them like a storm given form, her voice carrying not words but a cry of wrath and sorrow that shattered stone and soul alike. The battlefield fell silent when it ended. The enemies lay in heaps of ash, their laughter silenced forever. The survivors of the Reach stared at her in awe and fear, their whispers trembling. Some fell to their knees, worshipping her as savior. Others recoiled, seeing the truth of what she had become. Kaldrith approached slowly, his blade lowered, his eyes filled with sorrow deeper than any wound. He stopped before her, his voice low, trembling. "What have you done?" She looked at him, her eyes glowing with light not her own, her voice hollow as the void. "I saved you." And in the silence that followed, she knew she had betrayed him more surely than if she had let him die. The battlefield lay in ruin, yet for a brief moment the roar of war had stilled. Ash hung in the air like a shroud, drifting down upon the broken stones of Kaldrith Reach. Those who survived knelt among the corpses of friend and foe alike, their faces lit by the ghostly glow radiating from Liren's skin. She stood unmoving, her breath ragged, her gaze distant. Thousands of voices echoed within her, a cacophony of souls that had fused with her own. Their whispers rose and fell like a tide, promising power, demanding vengeance, pleading for release. She was no longer only herself, and yet she was utterly alone. Kaldrith stood before her, his sword slack at his side, his armor battered and scorched. His eyes held neither awe nor gratitude, but sorrow so deep it hollowed him. The words he had spoken still lingered between them, a question heavy as a blade. "What have you done?" Liren wanted to answer, to speak with the voice he had known for centuries, but when she opened her mouth, the chorus of souls spilled forth instead. The sound was terrible, layered and inhuman, and even she recoiled at the alien resonance of her own voice. The warriors who had fought at Kaldrith's side bowed before her, their bodies trembling, some in reverence, some in fear. One whispered, "She has become our goddess." Another, barely more than a child, whispered back, "No, She has become our doom. Both were true, and Liren felt the weight of it crush her. She had saved them, but the cost of that salvation was etched into every glance Kael'thar gave her. Merath emerged from the shadows of the shattered council hall, his robes untouched by battle, his expression a mask of cold triumph. He looked upon her transformation, not with fear, but with satisfaction, as though he had long expected it. "So it is done," he said softly, his voice carrying across the ruins. "The High Seer has chosen eternity. Tell me, Liren, does it feel like victory?" She turned her gaze to him, and the light in her eyes flared, casting his shadow long across the broken stones. He did not flinch, though the air shimmered with the heat of her fury. "You betrayed us," she whispered, though the voices within her spoke the words in unison, making them sound like judgment carved from stone. Merath smiled thinly. "I betrayed nothing. I sought survival, as you did. The difference, Seer, is that I did not sell my soul to purchase it." Kael'thar's blade lifted, his body bristling with rage. "You opened the gates to them. You doomed us all for your lies." Merath spread his arms as though inviting the strike, and she answered those lies with something worse. "Look at her, Captain. Look into her eyes. Do you still see the woman you fought for? Or do you see only the monster she has become?" Kael'thar hesitated, and in that hesitation, Liren felt her heart fracture. He did not lower his blade, but he did not deny Merath's words. His silence screamed louder than any accusation. The ground trembled again as another strike from orbit tore through the outer districts. The fires grew higher, the screams closer. The Reach was not yet safe. It was only dying more slowly. Liren raised her hand, and power surged from her like a storm unleashed. The flames bent and twisted, snuffing out beneath her will. The enemy ranks scattered, their laughter silenced by terror. In her presence, the battlefield bent. She was salvation, she was horror, she was both. The survivors looked to her as if she were more than mortal, their hope rekindled by fear as much as faith. They cried her name, their voices rising into a chant that filled the night. But within her, the voices of the dead howled louder still, demanding more, urging her to consume, to annihilate, to bind all that remained into her hollow eternity. Kael'thar stepped closer, his voice low, desperate. "Liren, stop. You cannot walk further down this path. Every step you take leads you farther from us. If you keep this power, you will not save the Reach. You will burn what little remains." She turned to him, her face pale, her eyes ablaze with unnatural light. "If I let it go, you die. They all die. I have seen it. Tell me, Kael'thar, what choice do I have?" His jaw tightened, his hand gripping his sword as though it were the only thing anchoring him. "The choice to remain yourself. The choice to fall with us rather than rise alone. Do not betray who you are for the sake of who you think you must become." Her tears burned, falling as drops of light upon the cracked stone. She reached for him, but when her fingers brushed his hand, he flinched, not in rejection, but in fear of what her touch might mean. That flinch cut deeper than any blade. Merath's laughter broke the moment, cruel and sharp. "You see, even he recoils. You saved him, yet he fears you more than he fears death. You call me traitor, Liren, but the truth is that you are the greatest betrayal of all." Something in her broke then, and the voices within her surged. She raised her hand, and Merath was thrown to his knees by a force unseen, the ground cracking beneath him. Power roared from her, her fury radiating like fire. The crowd gasped, torn between awe and horror, watching their seer judge the traitor with godlike wrath. Kael'thar stepped between them, his sword raised not at Merath but at her. His voice trembled, but his stance did not falter. If you kill him now, it will not be justice. It will be the proof he needs. They will see you as monster, not savior. Do not give him that victory. Liren's breath came ragged, her hand trembling with power that could not easily be contained. She looked at Kaldrith, at the man she had damned herself to save, and for a moment she saw the reflection from the mirror, him broken at her feet, her crown of fire burning above. She staggered back, the power receding, though the voices screamed their fury at her hesitation. Merath rose slowly, his smirk returning. You hesitate, even now. You think yourself immortal, but you are still chained by weakness. That weakness will kill you. And him. Liren turned away, her shoulders trembling, her heart hollow. Kaldrith lowered his blade but did not step closer. The distance between them had become a gulf, wide and cold, carved by her own hand. Above them, the skies thundered with fire. The Reach still burned, its last refuge crumbling. And within her, the voices whispered ever louder, promising that the only way forward was to surrender completely. She walked back into the flames, the chant of her name echoing behind her, the hollow crown of prophecy pressing ever tighter against her brow. The fires of Kaldrith Reach grew higher with each passing hour, curling around its spires, as though the very stars had descended to consume what remained. The air was thick with ash, the ground slick with blood. Every cry that rose from the streets was an echo of despair. Every clash of steel, another verse in the dirge of a dying empire. Liren moved through it all like a phantom, the glow of the souls within her casting long, trembling shadows. The people parted at her passing, some dropping to their knees in reverence, others turning their faces away in fear. Their eyes reflected both worship and dread, and she felt the weight of both crush her with equal cruelty. The chorus within her mind never ceased. The voices of thousands surged like a storm tide, their hunger pressing against her will. They urged her to unleash, to burn away every enemy, to tear the traitor Merath limb from limb, to bind even the living into her eternity. It was intoxicating and unbearable, each whisper both a promise and a curse. She felt her humanity thin with every moment, stretched like glass before it cracked. She wondered how much of herself still remained, and whether Kaldrith saw her at all beneath the light that blinded her. Kaldrith himself stood at the gates of the inner sanctum, his body weary but unbroken, his blade dripping with the remnants of those who had dared breach the threshold. His warriors had dwindled to a handful, their armor scorched, their eyes hollow, yet they stood still, drawn not only by duty but by his presence. He was their last anchor in a world collapsing, and for Liren, he was the last fragment of what she had once been. When she approached, he looked at her, not as the seer, not as the goddess her people now whispered of, but as the woman he had known for centuries. His gaze held sorrow deeper than exhaustion, and his voice, though quiet, carried the weight of every truth they had never spoken. You cannot hold them much longer. Even with your power, the Reach falls. We are surrounded on every side. Her heart clenched, though she forced her voice to remain steady. Then we do not fall quietly. We make them bleed for every stone, for every life they steal. He shook his head, his eyes dark with anguish. Listen to yourself. That is not who you were. You do not speak of hope anymore, Liren. You speak only of vengeance. She opened her mouth to deny it, but the voices within her screamed, drowning out her thoughts, demanding she accept what she already knew. She closed her eyes, her hand trembling at her side. Perhaps vengeance is all that remains. The moment fractured when the enemy breached again. The sound of shattering crystal rang out, and raiders poured into the sanctum, their laughter cruel, their weapons flashing in the dim glow. Kaldrith roared, rallying his warriors, his blade cutting arcs of fire through the dark. Liren lifted her hands, and power surged from her in waves, searing light tearing through the enemy ranks, turning them to ash where they stood. The chamber shook with her wrath, the air burning with her fury. The survivors stared in awe, their faith in her renewed by terror. They cried out her name as though it were salvation itself. Yet as the last enemy fell, Liren turned and saw the look in Kaldrith's eyes, and it was not awe, it was grief. He lowered his sword slowly, his shoulders heavy, and for a moment she wished he would shout at her, curse her, strike her, anything but that silence. It was in that silence that Merath struck. From the shadows of the sanctum he emerged, flanked by those who had chosen his path. His voice carried above the smoke, smooth and cruel. Behold your goddess of fire. Behold how she consumes all. She has saved you, yes, but she will not stop. Already she feeds on the souls of our dead. Already she drinks from the ashes. How long before she drinks from you as well? The crowd wavered, their awe shifting once more into fear. Murmurs rippled, doubt spreading like rot. Merath's smile widened as he stepped forward, his words dripping poison. She is no savior, she is the end. I offered survival, and you mocked me. She offers eternity, and it will devour you. Choose before her fire burns you all. Kaldrith moved before Liren, his sword raised, his voice fierce. He lies. He would sell you into chains. Do not listen to him. But Merath's words had already sunk deep, and Liren felt the eyes upon her shift, saw faith turn brittle once again. The betrayal was not a sudden wound. It was the reopening of a cut that had never healed. She stepped forward, her light burning brighter, her voice carrying above the chaos. I am no goddess, I am no liar. I have damned myself to save you, and still you doubt. If I burn for you. Yet even as she spoke, the voices within her twisted her words, echoing them with tones of hunger, making them sound less like sacrifice and more like a threat. The people recoiled, their murmurs rising. Merath saw their fear and struck like a serpent. You hear it yourselves. She has become a vessel for the dead, a husk filled with shadows. Strike her down now, or be consumed. The sanctum erupted. Some rushed forward to shield her. Others raised their blades against her. Brother turned on brother once more, their cries filling the chamber. Kaldrith's warriors clashed with Merath's, steel ringing against steel, blood staining the stones. The Reach's last refuge dissolved into chaos, not from the enemy without, but from the enemy within. Liren stood in the center of it, the voices within her screaming for her to unleash, to burn them all, to end every doubt in fire. She raised her hands, and the power gathered, searing light filling the chamber. Kaldrith's voice cut through it, desperate. Liren, no. If you strike them now, you become what he says you are. Her body trembled, the power straining against her control. She looked at Kaldrith, at the man she had damned herself to save, and in his eyes she saw not fear of death, but fear of losing her entirely. Her tears fell, glowing drops against the broken stone. She forced the power back, though it screamed within her, burning her from the inside. The battle raged around her. Merath's blade flashed as he cut down those who still stood with her, his laughter echoing through the smoke. Kaldrith fought toward him, his movements fueled by fury, but the tide was heavy, and she saw the moment prophecy began to claim him. His step faltered, his guard slipped, and an enemy blade struck deep into his side. Her scream tore through the chamber, a sound that was not hers alone, but the cry of every soul bound within her. Aeldar staggered, blood blooming across his armor, yet still he fought, still he refused to fall. She saw his hand reaching through the chaos, reaching for her, and in that moment the mirror's vision pressed harder than ever. The crown of fire above her, his body broken at her feet. The choice was no longer prophecy. It was here. It was now. Aeldar's cry split the din of battle, a sound more harrowing than the clash of steel or the wailing of the dying. Blood spilled from the wound in his side, staining his armor black. Yet still he swung his blade with defiance, cutting down those who pressed too near. His body moved as if driven by will alone, sheer determination dragging him through agony. Liren saw him falter once, saw his leg buckle beneath him, and the mirror's vision pressed harder than ever. His body broken at her feet, his hand reaching toward her even as she turned away. The voices inside her screamed. They urged her to unleash, to pour the full torrent of her power upon the chamber, to burn Merath and his traitors into ash, to obliterate every soul that doubted. They promised salvation. They promised Aeldar's survival, if only she surrendered fully. Their chorus drowned the cries of the living, their fury eclipsing the pounding of her own heart. She staggered, her hands trembling with the weight of the storm. Merath's laughter rang clear across the sanctum, cruel and triumphant. "Behold your savior," he shouted, his voice carrying above the chaos. "Behold how her silence damns you, how her power consumes even her will. She cannot choose, for she is no longer one of you. She is a husk, a vessel, a monster." The crowd wavered, their blows hesitating, their cries faltering. Some turned their blades away from one another, caught between terror and doubt. Others screamed in desperation, charging at Merath with reckless fury, only to fall beneath his sword. His betrayal bloomed into victory, and the Reach cracked further beneath the weight of its own division. Aeldar staggered toward Liren, his blade dragging, his body trembling. He reached for her, his voice low but burning with the last of his strength. "Liren, do not let it take you. If you save me, let it be as yourself, not as this." She looked into his eyes, and for a moment the storm of voices faltered. She saw not the warrior, nor the captain, but the man who had walked beside her for centuries, who had stood through silence and fire, who had loved her without ever speaking the word. The tears burned her cheeks as she whispered, "If I let it go, you die. I cannot lose you again." He gripped her hand, his blood warm against her skin, his gaze unyielding. "Then let me die. Better that than lose you while you still breathe." The words struck her like a blade, carving deeper than prophecy, deeper than betrayal. She felt the power within her recoil, raging against restraint, demanding release. She screamed, a sound that shook the chamber, light bursting from her body as she raised her hands. The ground trembled, the walls cracked, the air itself burned with the fury of the bound souls. Merath staggered back, his smirk faltering for the first time, his eyes widening in fear. But the power did not fall upon him. Liren forced it downward, away from the living, into the stone beneath their feet. The chamber exploded with light, shards of crystal erupting outward, the ground splitting with fire. The force hurled warriors aside, silenced their blows, forced them apart. The chaos stilled in an instant, awe and terror binding every heart. When the light faded, Liren stood in the center, her body trembling, her skin glowing faintly with the weight of eternity. Aeldar knelt before her, his hand still gripping hers, his breath ragged but alive. Around them, the survivors stared in silence, their weapons lowered, their faith and fear indistinguishable. Merath's voice broke the stillness. softer now but sharper than a knife. You see, even restraint cannot save her. She is consumed already. Today she spares you. Tomorrow she will not. Liren turned her gaze upon him, the light in her eyes burning brighter, and for a moment he faltered. But she did not strike. She looked instead at Kael'thar, his blood staining her hand, and whispered, "I will not let prophecy decide. I will not." The voices within her howled, their fury lashing at her soul. They promised her Kael'thar's life eternal, his wounds healed, his death averted, if only she surrendered fully. She nearly faltered, nearly gave in, but Kael'thar's grip anchored her. His eyes told her what his words had said, that to save him by becoming something else was no salvation at all. She pulled him closer, pressing her forehead against his, her tears falling hot against his bloodied skin. "Then fight with me, until the end, no matter what comes." He nodded, his breath shallow, his body trembling, but his gaze unbroken. Always. The enemy surged again then, drawn by the weakness in their unity, the scent of despair that still clung to the air. Raiders poured into the sanctum, their laughter cruel, their weapons raised high. Merath stepped back into their ranks, his smirk returning, his voice carrying above the charge. "Then let her choice be your doom." Kael'thar rose beside her, his sword raised once more, his body trembling with pain yet unyielding. Liren lifted her hands, power blazing between her fingers, the storm rising again. The chamber shook with their defiance, their voices joined not in prophecy, but in choice. The first wave struck, and Kael'thar's blade met theirs, his roar echoing through the smoke. Liren unleashed her fury, searing light tearing through the raiders, their screams mingling with the chorus within her. Yet even as she struck, she felt the hunger of the souls grow stronger, their whispers more insistent. Each death she dealt fed them, each life taken drew her further into the abyss. She staggered, her tears burning, her voice raw, not for vengeance, not for hunger, for him, for them. The souls resisted, writhing within her, demanding more, but she held them back with will alone, her body burning with the effort. Kael'thar fought beside her, his strength failing, but his resolve unbroken. Together they carved through the tide, their movements a rhythm of defiance, a fragile harmony against the storm. But the cost was written in every heartbeat. Kael'thar's wounds deepened, his breath grew shallower, his strikes slower. And though she poured her power outward, though she bent the battlefield to her will, she knew she could not hold forever. The Reach was burning, its spires falling, its people scattered. And in her heart, she knew the prophecy had not been denied, only delayed, as the raiders fell in heaps of ash, as the chamber filled with the glow of fire and the sound of dying breath. Liren looked at Kael'thar, his body trembling, his eyes still locked on hers. She felt the crown pressing tighter, the voices whispering ever louder, the mirror's reflection closer than ever. And she knew the moment of his death was no longer distant. It was approaching with every step, every breath, every drop of blood. The light that once flared from Liren's hands had dimmed. Not for lack of power, she had become a wellspring of it, an eternal storm of wrath and sorrow, but because she could no longer bear to shine. Each pulse of energy tore more from the fragile remnants of herself, and she had begun to wonder whether her silence now was mercy or fear. Around her the sanctum smouldered. Corpses lay broken in grotesque angles, some still smouldering, others clutching weapons that had not saved them. The last of the enemy wave had been crushed under her fury, but even victory carried the stench of rot. Kael'thar knelt in the dust, his armor shattered across his back, his hands gripping the hilt of his blade as if letting go would shatter him entirely. Blood poured from a wound too deep to close, staining the stones at his feet, pooling in the etched runes beneath him. His breath came in shuddering gasps, and every rise of his chest felt like a rebellion against fate. He was still alive, but barely. Liren dropped to her knees before him, the weight of the souls within her pressing down like gravity. She reached for him with hands that flickered with light, her voice a whisper torn ragged by grief. "You stayed with me, even now." Aeldar raised his head slowly, his eyes cloudy with pain, but still holding her gaze. "I promised. Until the end." Her tears fell like starlight, burning as they touched the stone. She cupped his face with trembling fingers, and for a moment, time held its breath. She wanted to give him peace, to pour healing into him, to drag him back from the threshold. But the power she carried was not meant to mend. It devoured. It preserved only by subsuming. If she reached too far, she would consume what was left of him. "I can keep you," she whispered, voice cracking. "I can bind you to me. I can hold your soul forever. You won't die. You'll never be lost to me." He closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them, they were not afraid. They were weary, but they held no fear. "But I won't be me. Not anymore. You know that, Liren." She nodded, her breath trembling. "I know." The souls inside her screamed for action. Some urged her to preserve him, to make him immortal as she had become. Others demanded she let him fall, that his death would unbind the last thread tying her to restraint. They saw his survival as weakness, his death as freedom. The cacophony drowned out everything but the thrum of his fading heartbeat. Merath's voice rose again through the smouldering haze, distant but sharp as ever. "He dies for you, seer. He dies because of what you became. Is this your salvation?" She didn't answer. Her focus narrowed to Aeldar alone, the one constant through centuries of visions and silence, the one who had seen her when even she had not. She leaned closer, her forehead resting against his. "Tell me what to do." He coughed, the sound wet, his grip on her hand weakening. "Let me go." The words shattered something in her. Her light flared, uncontrolled, rising in a flare of agony and denial. She could feel the binding right hovering at the edge of her will. Just one breath, one whisper away. She could tie his soul to hers. He would not leave her. He would never be gone, but he would also never be free. She looked into his eyes, and he smiled, a faint, broken thing. "You were always the light, even when you couldn't see it. You still are." "No," she breathed, "not anymore." His eyes softened, "Then carry mine, until it's time." She pressed her lips to his brow, and the voices inside her fell silent. Just for that moment, just for him. Aeldar exhaled once, long and slow, and then his body slumped. The blade slipped from his fingers, the last breath leaving his lips without resistance. His warmth faded quickly. Liren did not cry out. She didn't scream or collapse or call his name. She simply held him, cradled him, and let the silence swallow everything. The chamber had stilled. Even Merath had fallen silent, sensing the shift in the air. The Reach itself seemed to breathe in slowly, uncertain what would come next. The light around Liren pulsed softly, no longer violent, but unbearably still. She rose slowly, Aeldar's body resting gently upon the stone. Her face was streaked with ash and tears, her eyes hollowed by what she had surrendered. The souls within her whispered again, quieter now, subdued by her choice. They had expected fire. They had expected fury. But she had chosen silence. And in that silence, they did not know what to be. Liren turned her gaze upon Merath, who stood now at the far end of the sanctum, surrounded by the few loyalists that still clung to him. He looked at her as one might look upon a storm they had once believed they could command. There was no triumph left in his eyes, only caution and the first edges of fear. "You let him die," he said softly. "You let him die for nothing." She stepped forward, her light rippling with every movement. "He died for everything, for what we were, for what I refused to become." He backed away a single step. "And what are you now, Liren? What have you become?" She didn't answer, not with words. Her hand lifted, and with it rose the voices of the bound, the thousands of souls who now followed her will. But she did not unleash them. She held them there, suspended on the edge of annihilation, and let him see what she could do, what she chose not to do. "You still think restraint makes you righteous," he spat. "But soon even that will break. You'll burn us all. You'll forget what it meant to be Aeldari." "I haven't forgotten," she said quietly. "I just remember everything." Merath turned and fled into the shadows, his followers scattering behind him. She let him go, for now. Liren turned back to Kelthar's body. She knelt beside him, resting her hand on his chest, her fingers still glowing faintly. The fire burned outside. The Reach groaned under the weight of collapse. But for this one moment, she did not move. She sat in silence, in ash, beside the man she had loved and lost. Not because she was powerless, but because she had chosen not to break him in saving him. The wind through the ruins of Kaldrith Reach carried no song. Where once crystal towers had sung to the stars, now only smoke whispered across shattered stone and broken banners. The fires had burned themselves low, leaving behind a scorched skeleton of what had once been called the last refuge. Ash coated everything: walls, weapons, skin. It clung to memory. It made ghosts of the living and shadows of the dead. Liren walked alone through the remnants, her footsteps slow, each one pressing softly into the dust like a mourning bell. The glow beneath her skin had dulled, but it had not vanished. It pulsed with every heartbeat, an echo of the thousands still bound within her. Their whispers had changed since Kael'thar's death. No longer commands or hunger, but questions, regret, a reverent, aching silence that grew with every hour she remained alive while he did not. She carried no weapon. She needed none. Those who had once sought to strike her had either fled or fallen silent. Word had spread of the seer who had chosen not to become a god, who had let the one she loved die rather than chain him to her damnation. Some called her noble, some called her weak, but none dared challenge her now, not out of fear of her power, but out of fear of what that choice had cost her. The bodies were being burned in quiet rows along the shattered temple square. The sky above was a bruised violet, neither day nor night, and no longer governed by the time of stars. Liren stood among the flames, watching warriors who once followed her being reduced to drifting smoke. Among them, Kael'thar's body had been placed, not apart, not elevated, but alongside the others. He had never demanded more than duty. He would not be given more in death. Her eyes stung, but not from the smoke. She had not wept again since she had let him go. The tears had dried inside her, turned to a hollow place that light could not touch. Merath was still alive. She could feel his presence lingering in the Reach's bones, hiding in the depths of tunnels and broken sanctums, whispering to the desperate and the frightened. He had not fled far. Cowards rarely did. They stayed close enough to the fire to warm themselves, but not burn. She knew he watched her. She knew he waited. The surviving counselors had gathered in the remnants of the hall, those who had not turned traitor or perished in the collapse. They spoke in hushed tones now, their voices no longer laced with ambition, but weighed by grief. When she entered, they fell silent. They stood, but not in deference, only uncertainty. She took no seat. She stood among them, and they parted as though her presence pulled the air from the room. One of them, Vaedra, still aged and brittle, but with steel in her voice, stepped forward. "The fighting has stopped, seer. The Reach is broken, but it lives. We need guidance. We need a future." Liren looked past her, toward the tall, stained glass aperture that once cast colors across the hall. Now it was cracked, streaked with soot and blood, the light behind it diffused and grey. She felt the weight of their stares pressing on her like stones. They waited for orders, for restoration, for a promise she could not give. "There is no future for Kaldrith Reach," she said. "Only memory. What is left now is not a city. It is a grave." The room recoiled in silence. Someone murmured a protest, but no one spoke it aloud. Vaedra's lips pressed together tightly. "And what would you have us do? Scatter into the void? Hide among strangers? Wait for another death to finish what this one began?" Liren turned to her. "I would have you remember that we endured not because we were strong, but because we loved. That when the darkness came, it was not power that saved us. It was choice." Her voice softened, almost broken. "Do not build monuments to me. Do not carve my name into crystal. Remember only this, that I let him go, that I chose to lose him, to keep him whole. If anything of Kaldrith is to survive, it must begin there." She walked out before they could answer, before grief could harden into politics. The wind caught the edge of her cloak and lifted it gently, as though trying to remind her of something she no longer believed in. She returned to the place where he had fallen. The sanctum was empty now, silent but for the faint hum of the cracked infinity circuit buried deep below. She knelt where he had knelt, laid her hand upon the stone that still held a faint stain of his blood. Her palm burned faintly, her breath catching. The souls within her stirred, not demanding, not loud, but present, watching, waiting. "I will not carry you forever," she whispered. "You do not belong to me, and I do not belong to you." She rose, walked to the deepest chamber, and opened the vault none had entered since before the fall. The final chamber of the circuit, the chamber where souls could be released, not devoured, not bound, returned. The doors responded to her presence, light weaving into the air, threads of old technology and ancient reverence. She stepped inside. The chamber pulsed with memory. Silence bloomed, not from absence, but from stillness. Here she opened herself. The glow around her flared once more, but this time not with fury or wrath. It was warm, soft, like breath in winter. The souls stirred, sensing her intent, some resisting, others accepting. She let them go, one by one, the names of the fallen passing through her lips, names she had not spoken aloud in centuries, names she had forgotten until now. When she reached the last voice, Kael'thar's, her hands shook. She held him within her still, his presence quiet but steady. If she released him now, she would never feel him again. No dream, no memory, no imagined touch in the dark. But he would be free. She wept then, for the first time since he had died. Not as a seer, not as a vessel, but as a woman who had loved and lost. Her voice cracked as she spoke his name, and when she let him go, the light around her dimmed. The chamber sighed as if exhaling. The glow faded. The silence deepened. She stepped back into the ruins, alone, not empty, but no longer full. The reach was gone. But something new had begun, wordless, fragile, and quiet. She did not know where the next path led, only that she would walk it without a crown. The wind changed on the day she left. It no longer smelled of ash and memory, but of cold stone and distant rivers, the kind of wind that belonged to places untouched by war, where time still moved in cycles rather than scars. Liraean stood at the edge of the reach, its crumbled towers behind her like the bones of something once divine. The path ahead twisted into a canyon of silent stone, ancient and narrow, forgotten by most. She had wrapped herself in a plain traveller's cloak, its fabric coarse and colourless, chosen for invisibility rather than reverence. The glow beneath her skin, once a beacon, now pulsed so faintly it could be mistaken for the heartbeat of someone almost human again. She did not look back, not because she had made peace with what lay behind, but because there was nothing more to be seen. Every truth had been burned or buried, every name either freed or swallowed by silence. And so she walked forward, one step at a time, into a world that no longer knew her name. The road was not straight. It curved through forests still damp with morning mist, and over hills where the stars blinked clearer than any map. There were no voices in her mind now, no counsel of the dead, no urgings from within. Only her breath, the sound of boots on soil, and the occasional call of unseen creatures beneath the canopy. Each night she lit no fire. Each morning she folded her bedroll without ceremony. In solitude, time became circular, and the grief that had once screamed now whispered. It was in a village without a name that she found her first interruption. Not of violence, but of something stranger, curiosity. Children watched her from behind broken fences, not because they recognized her, but because she moved like someone who had walked through fire and forgotten to burn. An old woman selling cloth by the well offered her water. Her hands were wrinkled and kind. She did not ask for a name. She only said, "You walk like someone going nowhere," but with reason. Liran had no answer to that, so she nodded and left the coin anyway. In time, stories began to echo ahead of her, whispers of a veiled wanderer who neither blessed nor cursed, but listened, who walked into towns, stood at the graves of the forgotten, and then vanished before nightfall. Some said she was a ghost, others a penitent god, but most simply called her the Quiet One, and that name she did not refuse. She walked through the Valley of Red Winds, where bones of forgotten wars lay half buried in crimson dust. She passed the shattered archive of Sereth Kai, where voices carved into stone still begged for salvation. In each place, she lingered only long enough to listen, to hear what the land remembered. Then she moved on, her silence not an absence, but a choice, a boundary. She did not speak until she reached the cliffs of Varthian, where the ocean carved its song into the rock. There, at the edge of the world, stood a boy, no older than 16, with hair tangled by salt and eyes that had seen too much. He held a blade in his hand, not raised, not threatening, but uncertain. He did not turn when she approached. "They said you would come," he said, "that you find the broken ones." She did not answer. He looked down at the blade. "I was going to throw this into the sea, or myself. I haven't decided." The silence stretched between them like a taut string. Then, quietly, she sat beside him, folding her legs beneath her. The sea crashed below, indifferent to both their fates. He finally turned. "Are you her? The one who glowed?" She looked at him, her face marked not by age, but by sorrow earned. She shook her head. Not anymore. He didn't ask more. Some truths didn't need to be confirmed to be believed. They sat in stillness until the sky began to turn, and in that long dusk, the boy dropped the blade into the sea. It made no sound as it vanished, swallowed by waves that kept no memory. That night, he spoke of the war that had taken his brother, of a promise broken, of the way light sometimes felt like a lie. Liren listened. She did not speak of Kael'thar. She did not speak of the Reach. But she said this: there is no redemption in forgetting, only in choosing not to repeat. He nodded, as if that was enough. When dawn came, she left before he woke. He would live, or he would not. But he would decide it with both hands open, not clinging to a blade. The road curved inland once more, and with each step, her name faded a little further from the world. She became a myth told in whispers by travelers and dreamers. The seer who let go, the god who refused the throne, the flame that chose silence. But Liren knew better. She was none of these things. She was only a woman who had once believed that power could save what love could not, and who had learned, too late, that some things must be lost so others may breathe. In a glade where silver trees bent toward one another like conspirators, she found a place to rest. The sky was pale, the air still. There, she removed the last crystal shard from the pouch at her belt. It hummed faintly, still bearing a fragment of something ancient. Not power, but memory. Kael'thar's voice, brief, laughing, real. She buried it beneath the roots of a tree that would never know his name. Then she lay down beside it, closed her eyes, and let the world move on without her. She was not dying, but she no longer needed to be found.